Good afternoon. Welcome to the final keynote of SLJ Summit 2020. I am Erika Long. I am so delighted to actually be here in conversation. I am stoked to be in the presence of Patrisse Cullors. Welcome, Patrisse. How are you today?
Oh, thank you so much. Super, super grateful. I'm also doing well on
Good.
this afternoon, and just a lot of gratitude for being able to be in conversation with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. The summit theme this year is culture shift, really aimed to focus on providing space for attendees to learn and contribute ideas for how we can promote an equitable world and close the opportunity gap for all children. There are many educators here today, as you know, including you. Some who may be familiar with Black Lives Matter, but not necessarily familiar with your story and your work. So I'd
Yeah.
like for you to share a bit about your work and why you felt it's so important to write your memoir when they call you a terrorist.
Well, thank you, Erica. I really wasn't interested in writing my memoir. And I was convinced after the tragic shooting in Dallas of the five police officers, after the killing of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, and the protests that happened subsequent to those killings, and then the murder that happened at that protest, the murders that happened at the protest. um, I was convinced that I had to tell my own story, and I really wanted to encourage other leaders inside of Black Lives Matter to also tell their own stories. And that's because, if you remember, and if the audience remembers, after that, after those killings, Black Lives Matter was blamed for it. And many people went on national television calling us terrorists. And I was scared. I was scared for myself and for my children. I mean, for my child, who I just had at that moment. And I wanted to tell the story of why we started BLM in the first place. I wanted to remind the country and the world that our movement was a movement that was uh, positioning peace and love and justice for Black people and for everybody else. And my story felt like an important intervention in this narrative that we were trying to destroy the country.
I love that you call it an intervention.
Mm.
That's definitely. I had not thought of it that way, but it's definitely what it is. And to your point, people are still calling Black Lives Matter a racist group and the reason for so much discord. So it's really important for those reasons that this story, this memoir, is out there. When reading When They Call You a Terrorist, your emotion, authenticity, and truth are extremely raw. I jaw dropped lots of times in the
Yeah.
midst of reading the first one and then listening to the YA edition, which you narrate.
Mm.
I imagine it's similar to what the families of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and so many countless others are feeling. Share with us the significance of reading When They Call You a Terrorist, not only as humans and good citizens, but also as educators.
Yes, I mean, I think that every educator should read When They Call You a Terrorist, and also should read Alicia's new book, The Purpose of Power, because you're reading some of the civil rights leaders' thoughts and feelings about what we've gone through, and how we are trying to change the course of this country. I think that every educator should be positioning these books as an opportunity to teach the next generation of leaders. My book is a book about how a young Black girl who was raised poor ended up becoming a movement leader. And young people need to know that they have the ability to be leaders right now. I was a young activist, and I was gratefully, honored by so many adults in my life to really support me and remind me that my leadership was critical and necessary for this country. And so educators need to be on the front lines of supporting the voice and vision of young people. And they have the ability to provide the tools to a new generation of leaders.
Definitely. It's something that I work toward in my library each year, especially with when I know students who have had those opportunities where they are active in their communities. They've been to protests and have held walkouts in schools. And so you're right, it's extremely important for us to be able to continue to provide them the tools and empower them to use those tools and use their voices. In light of the Young Readers Edition being out, what have you seen from young people that makes you hopeful about the movement? And what role do you think they play in activist work?
Well, I just read numbers today that from the ages of 18 to 29, young voters are coming out in record-breaking numbers.
I saw those numbers last night.
I'm not talking about double, but triple the amount of young voters that went out in 2016. And so this is both about young voters and young people in particular, and their relationship to wanting to change the country. But I also want to say it's about our movements. It's about the Women's March. It's about Black Lives Matter, Me Too, March for Our Lives, Time's Up. So many movements that have said we can change the course of history, and voting is such an important part of changing the course of history. There is a vibrancy to this moment that is very different than 2016, and everybody feels it. And so I'm so impressed with the numbers. I'm just like so impressed. And those are just people who've gone out to mail in their vote or early voting. That's not even the numbers that we'll have the day of. So we are in such a good position. And if anything, whatever happens in November, what we know is we are changing the way that people relate to civic engagement.
Right, right. Since your book was first published, what in this landscape has changed for better or for worse? And what do you see as our future? It's so different.
I was like, everything has changed.
Yeah.
Our understanding of what is truth and what is fake has changed. We are living in a global pandemic. None of us foresaw, except for the folks that were in national office and were told early on that some disease was coming. I mean, regular people had no idea. And I think, you know, on the upside, we're seeing some of the most powerful, most innovative ways of people relating to both mutual aid and providing support to communities, as well as a new political infrastructure that is breaking through in this moment. It's a powerful time. It's a powerful time. It's a tragic time, but I have so much motivation and so much hope for the people. The people change the world. The people change the world, and that's how it's happened over and over and over again. And so the people are my guiding light right now.
I love that you said that you feel so much hope. I think there's a sentiment of that with a lot of people right now. And I think those numbers that you talked about, I saw those numbers last night. I think that is what continues to provide more hope for us in what we will see and what we will do in the days and years ahead. Since your book, you're an educator, I'm sorry, I wonder what advice you would give other educators on how to navigate uncomfortable conversations and just even show up for their students in what we know is a politically charged society right now, especially as we reckon with civil unrest. I think it's going to be extremely important for us the closer we get to actual election day, because unfortunately, I have this feeling that no matter what the outcome, there's going to be an uproar. And so I would really love to hear your educator perspective and your activist perspective on how educators need to approach these uncomfortable conversations in their classrooms.
So I think first and foremost, having courageous conversations are such a critical part of how we evolve as a country and as a people. And so one of the first courageous conversations that educators should and need to be having is the courageous conversation about race and racism in this country. You can't get around it. You can't get away from it. It's everybody's seeing it. And so be as educated as you can be about these topics. Don't wait for a student to bring something up. You bring it up, and you bring it up in a constructive and innovative way, a way that makes other students in the classroom feel comfortable with talking about race and racism. For too long, we lived in a country that once, uh, the decades of the civil rights movement sort of waned, nobody wanted to talk about race and racism. It was like there was so much shame about the history of race and racism that we didn't allow for us to have a new and innovative conversation. And so now is a time for educators to approach the conversation around race and racism with a lot of curiosity. And your young people are already talking about it. They're already seeing it all over social media, and they're going to be with you majority of the day. So might as well allow for it to be a place where they get to learn and grow, instead of creating it in a dynamic where they feel shame around it or they feel like they shouldn't be talking about it. I also think this way about gender and sexuality. These are all things young people are talking about, and there are ways that as educators we can bring these conversations up in innovative and supportive ways. I'm going to tell you a story about my child. My child is 4 years old, and we are in a pro-Black, pro-queer, pro-trans, anti-racist household. And we were out and about the other day, and he said something. He said, that person looks like a man. And I said, okay, well, tell me more about why this person looks like a man. And he gave me sort of the indicators. And then I said, can I actually offer something to you? He said, yes, mommy. And I said, nobody looks like a man or woman. We look like human beings. And he said, oh, okay, human beings. I said, yeah, we don't describe people as man or woman because we don't know. We don't know how they identify. So when you see someone that looks like a human being, then you say, oh, that looks like a human being. So then my book agent called me, and we were on FaceTime, and my son was with me. And she said, oh, look at that cute little boy. And he said, I'm not a boy, I'm a human being.
Oh my
Our,
goodness.
our children absorb everything we do, say, think, feel. That's because they're figuring out the world, and they're figuring it out through us. So we get to shape them differently. And while there's no indicator right now that my child's going to be trans, I'm still opening up the space for him to figure it out. And I want him to know that if he ever chooses to be genderqueer or trans, that there was already a space open and a conversation open in our household where he had the language to be like, oh, okay, human being. Okay, that's why mommy was saying these things. And so as educators, we get to do that for young people. And it really does help us live in a different kind of world.
It does. And I love that you kind of I love your story about your son, because I was going to ask you, from listening to you talk about how we have these conversations and that we can have unique conversations in a different way, or be creative about them in ways that we weren't in the past. And I was thinking, so I would love to hear you say, like, what age is too young to have those conversations as educators? And you've already answered it by sharing that story. Like, the key is we have to be creative, right? Because there's always probably going to be some pushback from some parent or community
Right.
member somewhere. but it's all about how we go about having those conversations in order to make sure that we are still giving our kids what we're supposed to give them. And some people are so focused on the fact that we are just educating and we're teaching to books or we're teaching to tests, when my thing is we are always supposed to be shaping young people to be productive citizens,
That's
right?
right.
And so I love that you shared that. I am going to head to one last question. Hang in there with me with this one, because I'm gonna read aloud from this beauty. I often have conversations about racism, white supremacy, and social justice, about how we have to call people in for them to understand their privilege when they feel like our good trouble, as John Lewis calls it, is too radical for them. I often believe that some people refuse to see or believe anything other than what they know to be true, which is simply their own experience. And I want to go to a part in your memoir where you're honoring your father at his
Hmm.
burial.
Hmm.
And you begin to think about what his time incarcerated must have done for him. Oh my goodness.
Hmm.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
um, and so I'm gonna read part of that.
Yeah.
And just to kind of set the stage for those who haven't had the opportunity to read When They Call You a Terrorist yet, um, in this portion, Patrisse is at the burial for her father, and as he was a veteran, and so as they begin to play taps, she starts to have this time of reflection. What did it do to him? All those years locked away, all that time in chains, all those days upon days without human touch except touch meant to harm. It would be easy to speculate about the impact of years of cocaine use on my father's heart, but I suspect that it will tell us less than if we could measure the cumulative effects of hatred, racism, and indignity. What is the impact of strip searches? What is the impact of years of strip searches, of being bent over, the years before that when you were a child and knew that no dream you had for yourself was taken seriously by anyone, that you were not someone who would be fully invested in by a nation that treated you as expendable? What is the impact of not being valued? How do you measure the loss of what a human being does not receive? This man who died of a broken heart in this nation of broken promises. And I think that if my father could not be possible in this America, then how is it that such a thing as America can ever be possible? And so, my last
Hmm.
question to you is, what is the impact? Because I feel like it's immeasurable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's thank you for sharing that. It is, I don't even think we fully know as Black people the impact. I think we live the impact. We die early because of the impact. But I often think about, those of us who survive and what we had to witness, what we are fearful of becoming truth for us and our family, what often does become truth for us and our families, and how that lands. We cannot be fully, we can't be the full and whole human beings that we desire to be, given the state of the world and the country in particular. This place has to change in order for us to be fully the human beings that we desire to be and that we deserve to be. We cannot keep living in the ways that we've lived and the ways that we are living right now. It's not sustainable, not just for Black people, but it's not sustainable for any of us. I often say this, we're not just in a fight for humanity. This is a planetary fight. We are trying to shift the way human beings and a specific set of human beings in particular have been treated for a very long time. We have to shift that. It is the only way out of this very, very painful and tragic reality that exists on a daily basis. And we have to do it together. It shouldn't just fall on Black folks to change the country, although it does time and time again, especially Black women. We need everybody involved to change the course of history.
And with that, I will, along with Patrisse, I hope, leave everyone with this charge to be part of that change for history. Thank you so much, Patrisse.
Thank
I
you.
really enjoyed being here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.